Regarde là-bas. Est-ce que tu nous vois? C'est difficile à dire. La vie sans toi. Est-ce que tu y crois? Je ne sais pas écrire. Tu manques de toi. Un coin tranquille, peut-être une île, vie indocile. La nuit défile dans mon exil, un coin tranquille.
It's been getting pretty chilly here in Montreal, especially at night. And we've brought in most of the plants that we're going to try and keep alive in the basement under the artificial lights for the winter time. There's a few stragglers outside that still need to be brought in. I dragged a bunch of herbs and other plants into the basement and stuck them under the artificial lighting, but I haven't made proper place for them yet, so they're sort of crowded in between the drying rack for in our laundry corner and the deep freeze. So this week, the task will definitely be to create actual designated space for the plants to spend the winter. But there are a handful of them that stay out all winter long and come back on their own the next year. The strawberry plants, for some reason, always seem to last the longest. They hold out and stay green right up until the snowfall, and they're always the first ones to show a sign of life in the spring, which is so beautiful, but to the point where I can't tell if they're still green from last autumn or if they're newly green from the spring. It takes time to see. For the last couple of years, I've grown hops in a planter in the backyard. I don't make beer. I just find hops is so beautiful, and it just drapes all over these lights that we have hanging. And each year the vine gets a little bit longer, and I'm hoping one day it'll wrap all the way around our tiny courtyard in the back. In the autumn, before it gets too cold outside, I pull up the roots and I put it in a little box of moss. And last fall was the first time that I did it, and this spring I was so emotional when I opened the lid and I saw that the hops had started to grow just the tiniest bit in the box. It was like it knew, even in the dark corner of the basement, what time of year it was, that it was time to wake up and start growing. I got really really excited, like actually emotional about it. It's beautiful how plants are cyclical too. No matter what the conditions are, they know. Okay, whatever. I'm weird, I know. We're November now, which feels like sort of an in-between kind of month, sort of, because after summer, we had September, which is usually pretty busy for a lot of people, back to school, back to routine, back to spending more time at home, and all the preparation that entails, I guess. And then October here in Canada, we have Thanksgiving in October, plus there's Halloween, and that sort of season sort of has a whole autumnal, spooky, cozy, comfy theme to it. And then next month in December, we start really going into holiday mood, very festive, but November sort of doesn't have that same. I know in the US they have Thanksgiving midway, but aside from that, I don't know, it just feels like it's not quite as cozy as autumn because it's actually getting cold. It snowed here recently a couple times already, and it's supposed to snow this afternoon. And then I don't know. Anyway, it's November. It feels a bit in between. But one of the things that is fun, I think, for me anyways, in November is that I get really into like cooking and baking and stuff like that. So I've been baking a lot more than usual, probably even more than usual for the season. But maybe that's just because I'm stuck at home recovering from this silly broken ankle business. I'm mobile now. I can move around a little bit, hobble around with a cane and stuff like that, but I'm not super able-bodied yet. Soon. Anyway, one of the things I've been baking a lot lately is bread, and I'm not great at it. I'm not a great. I'm good at like cookies and cakes and even pies and stuff like that, but I'm not the greatest baker, and I'm definitely not the best bread baker. But if there is one bread that I'm kind of starting to master, almost, not quite, it's definitely sourdough bread. And so I've been baking a lot of that, and we'll do that in this video with the starter that I got from a very kind stranger, which I talked about in the autumn rituals and fig cake video. I told the story of how this starter came to be, but without repeating the whole story, I will say that something I find very cool about sourdough starter is that it can be passed around like that. Like somebody can give you a tiny bit of starter from the jar that they've been feeding and nurturing for days or weeks or months or years, and they can give you a little piece of that, and then you can grow and nurture that and bake in your home with that same starter, and you can give some of that starter to somebody else, and then they can do the same. And I find it very cool that so many people are baking bread, like right now, today, with starter that came from the same place, even though these people don't know each other and have never met or spoken or anything, but for whatever reason, whatever connections they have, they've come up with the same starter. I find that beautiful. You can just buy starter at a store. You can buy packets of sourdough starter if you don't know anyone or can't find anyone that has some, and that's great too, and I'm sure you can make beautiful, beautiful bread out of it. But there's just like an added, I think every single video that I make has my dog snoring in it. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. But yes, whatever starter you can get your hands on, whether you made it yourself, bought packets at the store, or were handed it by a 400-year-old Italian grandma, or Egyptian, better yet, it's all good, and you can make beautiful bread out of all of it. I just find like the story behind it can be really an added romantic element. The first time I made sourdough bread, it was at a workshop, and we all made the dough together, and then we brought it home so that we could bake it the next day, because sourdough has to proof or rise for a good 12 hours before you can bake it. And at the end of the workshop, when we were leaving, we were all given a little pot of sourdough starter to take home so we could continue to make sourdough at home when we wanted to. And the person who was giving the workshop told us that this sourdough starter was a 100-year-old starter from France, I think. It was France or Italy. Maybe it was Italy. Anyway, so it was all very exciting. We're like, oh wow, just thinking about like all the grandmas who have used the same starter. I don't know why I said grandmas, could be anyone, but anyway, all the different people who probably use this starter. How exciting. The thing is, it takes some attention and care to keep sourdough starter alive. It's not hard, but you have to be consistent and attentive in that it needs to be fed regularly, or else it just becomes runny and loses all of its bubbly, beautiful, fermented goodness, so it's useless. And the thing is, or if you leave it out on the counter, as I have done, for too long without feeding it, it can literally just get moldy and be bad, and you have to throw it out. I can't tell you how stressful that is when you kill a starter that you're handed and told, this is 100-year-old starter from Europe, and people have managed to keep this starter alive for 100 years, and the fact that there's a massive batch of it where this little jar came from is like almost zero consolation. So I've killed a few 100-year-old starters and felt equally as horrible every time. I've also attempted, well, I shouldn't say attempted, I've made my own starter a handful of times as well. I've never quite perfectly mastered it. I've gotten some okay, not too bad starters going, but there's something about a starter that's been fermenting for quite a while that just gives it that perfect, bubbly, beautiful, bountiful bread. Apparently one of the oldest sourdough starters dates back to 3700 BC and comes from Switzerland. Although a lot of people say that it originated in Egypt, and in fact a tech developer, Seamus Blackley, made sourdough bread from starter that scientists had harvested from clay pots, Egyptian clay pots that were between 4,500 and 5,000 years old. And I have not seen the pictures, but apparently he tweeted the process and pictures of beautiful loaves of bread, and he said it was incredible, and it was so sweet, and it was the best bread ever. If you want to make your own sourdough starter, there are many different recipes and different processes that people use, but the most basic way to do it would be to use about 150 grams of flour mixed with 150 milliliters of filtered water, and give it a really good mix. And then for the next week, every day, feed your starter by mixing equal parts starter, flour, and filtered water, and allow it to ferment. If it's really hot, say in the middle of the summer, you might want to put it in the fridge because it might get hungry too fast or even get moldy if you're not really diligent about feeding it. So you have to feed it every day for the first week. And then after that, if you continue to feed it every day, that's amazing. It's a bit wasteful. You should feed it at least every 4 days though. When I first was making sourdough, I used to feel very guilty throwing out the excess, because what happens is you make the starter, it doubles in size or more, and then if you just keep feeding that starter without throwing some of it out, you're gonna have vats and vats of starter in your fridge. Way more starter than you could possibly know what to do with, unless you want to start a starter delivery business where you just start dropping jars off on people's porches for them. It can get pretty overwhelming. As your starter begins to ferment, you'll see that it starts to form bubbles inside. And a good, healthy, ready-to-use sourdough starter will be full of bubbles and be the texture of, I don't know how else to describe it except for, I remember there used to be this kind of marshmallowy goo stuff that, I don't know what it's called. It's not an actual solid marshmallow, it's that marshmallow puff stuff, if anyone knows what I'm talking about. That is what your sourdough starter in its ideal state would have the consistency of. So again, there are tons of different recipes out there, and it's really fun to experiment with different flours like rye and whole grain, whole wheat. There's just so many different options out there. So if you enjoy doing this, I really encourage you to experiment. For this recipe, which is also on the website, I'm using 420 grams of water mixed really thoroughly with 170 grams of starter. then adding 500 grams of unbleached white flour and 225 grams of spelt flour, as well as a healthy pinch of salt. I usually use a wooden spoon to start the mixing, and then once the liquid and dry start to combine, I'll just get my hands in there and start kneading the dough. At first, when you do this, your ball of dough is going to be pretty sticky. Don't be discouraged, just keep going until you get a nice smooth round ball. Then you put your dough in a well-oiled bowl, and I'll usually cover mine with a warm, damp tea towel and set it underneath the light overhead the stove for the night while we're sleeping. It has to rise for about 12 hours, and it should double in size. Then you're gonna pull it out of the bowl and knead it again. It's fun, you can usually feel all the bubbles inside the dough popping. Your dough should be springy. If it's really, really sticky for some reason, don't stress, just try and add a little bit more flour. We'll put the dough in a lightly floured bread basket, but you can put it in a lightly floured bowl or even put it back in the oiled bowl for an hour or an hour and a half to rise some more. And if you look closely, you can see the dough is already bouncing back because of all the air bubbles inside. Next, we're going to score the bread, which you can do with a sharp knife or a scoring tool like the one that I have here. Honestly, my preferred method is with a pair of scissors. I just don't want to use the ones I have here in the kitchen because they've been used for so many other things. Some people bake their bread on a pizza stone, some have special bread ovens. I usually use a Dutch oven, which I will preheat for about 20 minutes, and I will bake the bread with the lid on for about 45-50 minutes, and then I'll take the lid off for the last 5. I hope you try this bread out, and I hope you experiment. There's so many different things you can do with it. You can make sourdough pancakes, focaccia. You can experiment with the sizes and the shapes of the baking pans that you use. You can wrap your loaf with baking twine so that you create different shapes with the bread itself as well. And it's tons of fun. Not to mention, sourdough bread is fermented in a way that nurtures more beneficial bacteria in your gut and lowers the amount of non-digestible carbs in the wheat. And this can make bread much easier to digest, especially for people who have IBS or gluten sensitivities. Sourdough bread also has a lower glycemic index, which means that it doesn't spike your blood sugar levels and insulin levels the same way that a lot of commercial bread does.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, please like the video, and also enable the notifications by clicking on the little bell once you've subscribed so that you know when new videos come out. I don't want you to miss out on any of them. And if you made sourdough, whether it was because of this video or just because you just happened to make some, please share. Can you put pictures in the comments? I don't remember. I hope you can. If you can put pictures in the comments, I would love to see pictures of what you came up with. And if you can't put pictures, just tell me what you made. If you have suggestions, if you have questions, comments, please leave them in the comments below. And thank you again. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, thank you so much for believing in this work and helping to make this channel possible. Have a great day and take great care of yourselves.